This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
44 days. I mean, 44 days since the fella got the job again, since he came back into the White House. And there were some warnings prior to that about what was likely to happen when he got in. Project 2025, it was called, and it read almost like a sort of imminent American apocalypse. So far, he's ticking those boxes. Where do you start now? The withdrawal of support for Ukraine, a policy position that until relatively recently enjoyed almost unanimous support, certainly across this country. Do you know, speaking of support, who do you think, I told you some time ago, didn't I, about that article in Harper's Magazine, I think in 1942, shortly before the United States joined the Second World War, about whether or not you'd be able to spot a Nazi in your social circle. Whether or not, where are you now? How many people can you see where you're sitting now? Are you at work? Are you listening to me at work? If you're in the car, you probably shouldn't play this game. It might be a little bit hazardous. If you're a passenger, it might work. You can't tell by looking at people in other cars. It has to be someone with whom you have some sort of relationship, someone with whom you've worked, or some family member perhaps, or people who are known to you. Who do you reckon would have gone there? Who do you reckon today will be suggesting that we shouldn't be spending the money on supporting Ukraine because, you know, something, Putin, something. That idea that the West doesn't represent resistance to totalitarian regimes, that it doesn't represent resistance to whatever the opposite of freedom may be, oppression, exploitation, the murder of dissidents and critics. Who would it be? Who do you reckon? If it were 1939, there'd be phone-ins on this radio station wondering whether we should really be getting involved. Did Chamberlain really get it that wrong? The Daily Mail, up until pretty much the last possible moment, was cheerleading for Adolf Hitler himself, who on the LBC schedule might have been giving you the Daily Mail line on Adolf Hitler being a lot better than people get. Have you noticed how people get so worked up about Adolf Hitler? They've got Adolf Hitler derangement syndrome. Have you noticed how it's ridiculous? They can't even say it. Some of them don't even call him the Führer. You know, they don't even give him his proper title. It's pathetic. It's ridiculous. They've gone a bit quiet now in the context of Donald Trump, but they'd have been here in 1938, 1939, wondering on air about whether or not the liberal position, the Churchillian position, were in fact the only one that we should be adopting. Do you remember when Boris Johnson wrote his biography of Winston Churchill? There's something we can at least be grateful for at the moment. Boris Johnson seems to have gone very quiet. He suggested that what Winston Churchill had done about 10 years before the Second World War broke out was stake the lot on a horse called anti-Nazism. That's how his mind worked. That's how the opportunist mind works. It's incapable of conceiving that anybody else is not an opportunist, not a weapons-grade opportunist. He put his shirt, that's the phrase he used, he put his shirt on a horse called anti-Nazism as if it were a career move. As if in 1930, Winston Churchill wrote two columns, one against the Nazis and one in favour of the Nazis, and he didn't decide until the last possible moment which column would actually get published. He's put his shirt on a horse called anti-Nazism, as if it were a 50-50, as if it were an act of opportunism, as if it were a gamble rather than a position of principle. Don't remind me, because I don't need reminding, that's all, of Churchill's imperfections. They are legion, as are Volodymyr Zelensky's. Of course they are. He's human. But if it were 1939, we would be running phone-ins, and certainly in 1938, certainly after the Munich Peace Conference, when Chamberlain came back, there would be people. And I might have been one of them. 20/20 hindsight is a wonderful thing. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't. But that's the point about that wonderful article in Harper's Magazine in 1942. An awful lot of people, and there were a lot of Nazi sympathisers in the United States at that time, as you know. But a lot of people would have been adamant they'd never have gone there. I mean, how many people have you heard fetishising almost memories of the Second World War, getting cross if footballers won't wear the poppy, And yet fast forward a few years, or even a few months, and here we are, contemplating a sick psychopath in the White House denying support to the most courageous wartime leader of the 21st century, to a country that is, however you dice it and however you serve it up, a country that is the victim of an illegal invasion by a murderous dictator. And you will have people in this country wondering whether we really need to be getting involved, wondering whether also with that little side order of Faragist anti-European feeling that has been so carefully nurtured in many of the same crucibles of hatred that delivered the White House to Donald Trump, that you find yourself... I'll tell you one thing. Can anyone remember why a European army was such a bad idea? Anyone? We had plenty of phone-ins about that on LBC. Oh, it'd be terrible to have a European army. Can anyone tell me why? Anyone remember why? Why creepy Uncle Nigel was so passionately opposed to the idea of a European army? I said at the time, and I'll say it again, I've always found, and I'm not a historian, I did philosophy at university, but I've got an A-level, I always found that the armies you need to be worried about are the armies that you're not in, not the armies that you are in. But here we are. Anyone remember why the European army was a bad idea? Because Ursula von der Leyen has attempted to rise to the moment today with a plan for a rearming of Europe. I mean, there's a phrase I didn't think I'd hear in my lifetime. I'm not going back to Francis Fukuyama. We did enough of that last week. We are in an era of rearmament, she said today. Europe is ready to massively boost its defence spending, both to respond to the short-term urgency to support Ukraine, but also the long-term need for more responsibility for our own European security. Wow. That possibly sounds a death knell of sorts for NATO as we know it. What is currently a North Atlantic Treaty Organisation may be about to cross the Atlantic. The rearmament. We are in an era of rearmament. 5 points to the plan. Unleash use of public funding on a national level. That means raising more money. Call me now and tell me whether you think we should be spending taxpayers' money on resisting Hitler. Number 2, loans, euros, to member states for defence investment. This is why the European Union has funds, has resources for moments of emergency. The power of the EU budget. I tell you what, it'd be awful, wouldn't it, at this moment in history, if we weren't in it. That would be a terrible... God, thank goodness for that, eh? Because if we weren't in it, we'd look like absolute Charlies at the moment, and we would be, by definition, compromised. And the mobilising of private capital, that through the European Investment Bank. So it is largely about money. I am drawn, as you know, largely because my very good friend and one of the bravest people I know, Sir Bill Browder, has been agitating and campaigning for the release of $300 billion in Russian state assets that's currently held by Western banks. The reason why the powers that be are reluctant to do that, or have been reluctant to do that so far, is precedent. The worry is that once you open the door towards allowing governments to help themselves to the enormous fortunes of private citizens, because those private citizens happen to be complicit in a murderous dictatorial regime, then what private citizens with enormous fortunes would be next? I think that's one of the reasons for resistance to the idea, because if you approach it simplistically, it looks like a no-brainer. We've helped ourselves to the interest on much of this money, and most of it is in Europe, which is why it's not one of the arrows in Donald Trump's hideous quiver. But the capital itself, as opposed to the interest, is apparently a different proposition. So, in 1939, the First World War was still obviously a very fresh memory. Not just here, but in Germany as well. It's, as you know, for many historians, the punitive nature of the post-war reparations were a reason why Hitler was able to triumph. Phone-ins in Germany in the 1930s would have been about how awful we were for extracting such a hideous price from them, and how the Jews had allowed it all to happen. Now, you know what those seeds grew into. But I don't think we're in the same space at all at the moment, and I don't know how feasible it is for Europe to go it alone. There are articles everywhere now. Prospect carries a particularly good one by Dominic Grieve. For now, the transatlantic alliance is over. New Lines magazine asks, can Europe back Ukraine's fight alone? The BBC puts its fact-checkers on the question of whether or not Europe can plug the hole. The breakdown, thank God, isn't quite 52-48. Could you imagine if the infernal ratio had popped its hideous little head up once again in this context? But it's pretty blooming close. It's 51-49, with Europe as a homogenous force fronting up 51% of the financial support, including military aid, of all the support for Ukraine, and America fronting up 49. So however you cut it, we, by which I mean the Allies sine USA, we have to double what we're spending just to stand still. We need to double what we're doing just to maintain the level that we are currently at. I mean, imagine if the United States and Europe were poised to double what they're doing, then, to coin a phrase, it might all be over by Christmas. But the United States, Donald Trump, my goodness me, how awful it must feel now to be a patriotic American, proud of Pax Americana, proud of almost 100 years of history, safeguarding freedom and democracy across the free world. And now you've got this man in the White House undoing it all at a rate of knots. I'll say it again because it is the most chilling number I can remember in a long time. 44 days. And he's already pressed pause. And listen, I don't do Brexit-style predictions when the variables are unknowable. I only do Brexit-style predictions when I can't see any alternative to the facts delivering a certain result. That's why all my Brexit predictions have come true, every single one. I can't do that here because I don't know the detail. None of us do. I'm turning into Donald Rumsfeld. There are known knowns, there are known unknowns. There are unknown knowns and there are unknown unknowns. But if it were something that anyone was minded to place a bet on, I think Trump's made his mind up. I think if you look closely at what he said running up to this point, even sometimes at the asides that he makes in press conferences, I think he's made a decision to abandon Ukraine, whatever happens. In fact, if you wanted to, I don't think this is Tim Foyle hat territory, but you could construe the events of the last few days as an attempt to get his hands on Ukrainian minerals before he abandons them and throws Volodymyr Zelensky under a bus. His comments overnight involve very more ad hominem attacks on Zelensky. One front page in the UK today says, Trump to Zelensky, your time's almost up. Get your hands on some of these resources, if you can, and then let Vladimir Putin prevail. Because here's the thing that I keep circling back to. And here's the thing that I don't think it is being acknowledged often enough. I don't know why. I don't think it's being acknowledged often enough. Maybe because I'm completely wrong. Maybe because of normality bias, which we've talked about a lot, coupled with a fear of hyperbole. So normality bias makes you less alive than you should be to the scale of a threat in front of you. And, of course, a fear of hyperbole means that you don't open your programme wondering what LBC would have sounded like in 1939 when Nazi sympathisers, fresh from the Daily Mail editorials, were ringing in to explain why we should abandon Poland to the German jackboots. That is a fear of hyperbole that prevents you from doing that. But if you prioritise understanding over everything, you are left with one simple thought. Nothing he has said and nothing he has done would have been met so far with anything other than delight in the Kremlin. Just pause for a moment. I know it's obvious. I know you probably realised it. But I don't think we can make that point often enough. Nothing that Donald Trump has done on the international stage, and quite possibly the domestic, but I wouldn't want to bet my shirt on that, but nothing on the international stage, or even if you want to zone in still further, with regard to Ukraine, not a single syllable to come out of the mouth of Donald Trump or his ludicrous sidekick J.D. Vance would have been met with anything other than complete delight in the Kremlin. They probably ran out of champagne on the night of Vance's speech to the Munich Security Conference. That's when the alarm became unignorable. That's when the snooze button stopped working. in Europe. The fact that a vice president of the United States can deliver a speech which contains references to family planning clinics in Scotland being a threat to freedom of speech, but says nothing about the threats posed by Russia or by China. So nothing that either of them have said and nothing that they have done would have been greeted with anything less than delight in the Kremlin. This isn't ambivalence. This isn't a free pass. This isn't this is good. We seem to have a very insular United States government, so they won't be bothering us anymore. This is complicity with the enemy of the free world. This is alignment with the Russian foreign policy interests. And again, the only reason I can turn off my hyperbole alarm when I say that the United States of America is now aligned with Vladimir Putin is because the Kremlin said so yesterday. Even now, looking at this landscape in front of us, I would feel a little bit silly independently suggesting that the United States of America is aligned with the Kremlin. I felt a little bit unready to even use the word appeasement 2 weeks ago. And now he is administering punishment beatings to the man resisting Russia in the actual Oval Office. So I don't know who can answer this question. And I've got a horrible feeling that the people who really can answer this question won't be able to, because the answer is the one we don't want to hear. But I'm going to ask it anyway, and I'm going to put, as ever on the programme, enormous trust in you to come to the table with insightful and interesting thoughts. But can Europe cope without the United States of America? Can it? I don't know who can answer this question. People with military experience, people who pay more attention than I do to what is going on in the world, people who, I don't know. Let's find out. Can Europe cope? The transatlantic alliance is over. For now. And for now is in black brackets. Can Europe cope? Can Europe go it alone? Can we afford to? Can we logistically meet the challenge? Can we, if, as I believe to be the case, Donald Trump has already long determined to abandon Ukraine, to abandon Zelensky, to wave Vladimir Putin through, can we cope? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
That hyperbole alarm that I talk about needs constant monitoring because it goes off unexpected. It goes off at the strangest times. It went off halfway through that introduction, but then it went off and then it went off again. It's one of those weird phrases, isn't it, going off? It went off and then it went off. An alarm goes off and then it goes off. So it's off now. But you sort of think, I mean, the American, the transatlantic alliance is over? Really? Are you sure? I mean, are we getting a bit carried away? Do you know how J.D. Vance described the UK overnight? Do you know? Have you heard this? He described the United Kingdom. This is the Vice President of the United States of America, some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 years. That's how the Vice President has just described us. Just described the United Kingdom. I think he included France in a similar guarantee. And there it is. That is the end of the transatlantic alliance as we know it. And you know all the people who say, oh, don't worry about what he says, just focus on what he does. That is a bit like standing in the school playground saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me, which is the biggest lie of all. Good Lord. Jason is in the Bay of Kotor in Montenegro. Jason, you can kick things off this morning. What would you like to say?
Thanks, James, and good morning. We spoke...
We have. I've just remembered who you are. You can't tell me exactly who you are, but this is your area.
Well, I'm a foreign policy advisor in an institute centred in the Western Balkans.
Yes.
It's actually a bit worse than you're alluding to.
God. Oh, God.
Well, within the last 24 hours, Mark Rutte tweeted that he had a very, very productive conversation with President Vučić of Serbia on stability in the Western Balkans.
Yes.
Now, most people know, I know you know, but for your listeners who don't know, that the protagonist vis-a-vis Kosovo, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina is actually Vučić. And if you look at what's happening in Serbia with the massive demonstrations against, the regime in Serbia. So for Mark Rutte to start talking about Vučić as being a stabilizing force is actually very worrying. And at the same time, within the last 24 hours, Trump has blocked Croatia's entry into the OECD. So make of that what you will.
Well, no, you will tell me what I should make of that.
Well, that the tentacles of Putin are all over Eastern, Central, Southern Europe.
And this is
in the ex-communist world, inverted commas.
And there's nothing in the blocking of Croatia joining the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development that fits in with the America First narrative. I mean, these are the pivots that we need to be looking for, aren't we? The ones that can no longer be dressed up as America First or MAGA. This is the enactment of Kremlin policy by the United States president.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And so and also remember in 2016 in Montenegro, the attempted coup d'etat against the incumbent president was actually done by Russian agents. And that's something that was, proven by Bellingcat. I know you know who Bellingcat are. So, this has been an ongoing thing by Putin in the region. And now, because the region is so dependent on American finance and so dependent on American security, in fact, Montenegro joined NATO really because of Article 5, because most countries that are historically bordered or that are bordered by their historical nemesis see NATO as a fallback position. Yeah, they're not joining NATO.
God, you weren't kidding.
Because they're in love with Mickey Mouse.
Oddly, that decision by me this morning to go in on the fact that everything he's done is delighting the Kremlin, that's the bit where things are much worse than I realised. We haven't even addressed the question of how much of this whole Europe might be able to plug or Europe might be able to fill. But this is where attention should be focused on this alignment, not on... Oh, he's actually, he's doing what he wants to do and what's best for America, and it might accidentally be welcomed by the Kremlin. He is, it would appear, on more fronts than Ukraine, now doing exactly what the Kremlin wants.
Yeah, it's not about what's best for America. It's about, this, I hate to use the word because it's so overused, but it's about this rise of fascism.
Yes.
And it's such, it sounds ridiculous when one uses such word in modern political context.
Until it doesn't, Jason, until it doesn't.
No, that's right, until it doesn't. And you've got people in Kosovo that just had an election where there has to be a coalition government. It's still Kurti who's going to be Prime Minister, thank God. We've got a government here in Montenegro that is pushing Serbia's narrative constantly and undermining Montenegrin independence and Montenegrin identity. You've got things happening in Georgia, you've got things happening in Croatia, in Bosnia. Dodik in Srpska Republic now is setting up a shadow government and trying to expand Srpska Republic. And, it's in part due to the closeness of the two Orthodox churches, Russian Orthodox Church and Serb Orthodox Church, but it's actually a replay of the 1930s. And I said this to you last time we spoke. It's much more a sort of 36, 39,
yes,
36 moment. And I think that Europe does have to take the lead. I have no doubt that a year in, 18 months into whatever the lead takes us to, that the US and others will join.
You think so?
Yeah.
Under Trump?
Because I think that the overwhelming majority of American people are not people who go for fascism, basically. We just have to declare it for what it is. And I understand Starmer's diplomatic words and why he's trying to bridge a gap. And, I am Labour, as it happens. I still have my vote, even though I live overseas. I'm not in love with Starmer, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. On this issue, he's taken a lead. I think that we have to support Starmer. Everybody in the UK has to recognise that we're at a moment where unity is what's most important. And it's wait and see. But I do think that there are certain things happening within Europe, especially France, Scandinavia, UK, which at least is enough to take the lead at the beginning of the fight back against Putin.
And you remind us of the wheels within wheels, and how many roads historically, if we are going to be drawing parallels with the 1930s, lead back to the Balkans, which is why taking a call from there at the top of the show today has been so helpful, although you were not exaggerating, Jason, when you suggested, certainly under your reading of the situation, and thank you for all the facts with which it was peppered. Things are a lot worse than we realise. It is 10:31. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time... the headlines now with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:35 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question of whether or not Europe can indeed cope with an abdication of all responsibility by the United States of America, if you're feeling generous, or an alignment, or rather, it's not even an alignment, because an alignment sounds like the action of equals. It is the surrendering of United States interests to the Kremlin. He is doing exactly what Vladimir Putin would want him to do. And what Jason reminded us of there from Montenegro is the number of Kremlin-facing regimes in Europe, or certainly movements, Kremlin-facing movements in Europe, the AfD, the old Front National in France, Farage's outfit, they've said it out loud. Even yesterday he couldn't help himself, trying to blame Zelensky for what happened in the White House, which is why the words of J.D. Vance latterly are so chilling, and we'll have a listen to those shortly, I think. But before that, more of your answers to these questions about whether or not Europe can do this. Can it even do it? What does it look like? Chris is in Berlin, appropriately enough. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on the call. Can you hear me, just to check?
Loud and clear. What's on your mind?
Perfect, James. So regarding your question on can Europe do it, I think from an economic and from a manufacturing point of view, yeah, sure, we could do it. But do we have the political will to go through with it? And I think that's something that we see once in a while. There are flare-ups of unconditional support for Ukraine and how we want to help them out and how we want to drag them out of this mess. But what you're saying previously is perfectly true regarding the expenditures. We would have to at least triple the expenditures. Europe alone would have to triple its expenditures just to get the needle going in the right direction that we want it to go. Perhaps. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that isn't enough. But what are the European voters going to say to that at the next election? Each of these individual countries, are they going to go along with that when their taxes go up, when they see that their social support that they might be dependent on are going down in support for something that is there is no ROI on this. We're giving money to Ukraine for their survival, and I totally understand. I'm totally in favor of that. Don't get me wrong.
No, I understand exactly what you're saying. What is? Forgive me for using this dreadful phrase, but I can't think of a better one. What's the mood music in Germany? Because here so far, the voices that are sort of siding with Trump are disgraceful and pathetic, albeit some of them are quite high profile. There's probably a Daily Telegraph columnist, I haven't checked. But what's the mood music in Germany when it comes to the prospect of selling much greater expenditure to the public for the new chancellor?
Well, I wasn't alive back then, and neither were you probably, but I think it feels like a repetition of the League of Nations, where we're kind of like, the bridge that was supposed to keep everything up with the Americans is slowly, that keystone is slowly moving out of position.
Yes.
And with Friedrich Merz becoming the next chancellor of Germany, pinned to be the next chancellor of Germany, All right. So Germany's going to release the Taurus, the secret weapon that the Ukrainians have been asking for from Germany, that Olaf Scholz has refused, to prevent any agitation of Russia, because Russia is continuously threatening Europe with nuclear war should they increase and ever more inch forward with their support of Ukraine, with the tanks, with the F-16s, with the Taurus. Honestly speaking, any of these threats that Russia has made against us and also Ukraine with the invasion, with the incursion into Kursk, none of that has ever resulted in an atomic explosion anywhere so far. And I don't want that to happen. Nobody in their sane mind wants that to happen, right?
But it's another word I don't particularly like, but I can't think of. There are tripwires that would change everything. Is the point that you're making? I think.
Well, we live in a realist world to some extent as well. Absolutely. I mean, where's the limit? Where's the limit for Russia? Where's the limit for Putin? The man is a dictator. There's no doubt about it. And any dictator cannot abdicate power without having an insurance policy that they won't be put into jail or tortured or worse should they ever get rid of their power. And that's the whole point of being a dictator. You cannot let go of power, because as soon as you do, you're going to be the first victim. You're going to be the first person on the chopping block, unless the people that follow you are backing you up, are the ones that you have control over.
Which means you haven't really been toppled at all. And what is the point of accruing all that stolen money, of slicing 50% off the top of all the fortunes that the oligarchs have stolen from the Russian people, if you don't get to hang on to it, if you don't get to keep it? Chris, thank you. It wasn't the best phone line, but I wanted to hear what you had to say. And of course I don't have to say mood music, as many people have pointed out. I could just say mood. You're absolutely right. What a wombat I am. Speaking of wombats, here is the man that some people in, even these days, the UK Parliament would have you believe is a friend of the United Kingdom. This is the current Vice President of the United States of America, J.D. Vance.
If you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. The security guarantee and also the economic guarantee for Ukraine is to rebuild the country and ensure that America has a long-term interest. You're not going to do that if you come to the Oval Office, insult the president, and refuse to follow his plan for peace.
So there it is. This is from Callum, who's 21 years old. James, the look on my dad's face this morning after he saw that comment from J.D. Vance was heartbreaking. Only one nation has invoked NATO's Article 5, and that's America. And who answered their call? Britain did. My father was there with them. Does he not remember the sacrifice that this country's servicemen and women made? 179 Brits dead in Iraq, 457 in Afghanistan. And then, in a very timely way, Callum asks, has Vance even said thank you? That's a moment. Surely that's a moment. Mark's in Hillsborough in Northern Ireland. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking me. I was just making the point that whilst I do think the EU can supplement for the loss of the US withdrawing from support for Ukraine, particularly on purchasing parity, because whilst we have a lower military budget, we can buy more with our money. I do think the question, though, that really is key is, can NATO, without the US, stand against it? And when I say that, I mean including Canada and including Turkey, because Turkey's got one of the largest land armies in the world. And when you include those two within that equation, then NATO, without the US, is actually as strong as the US, if you can understand.
So we're being a bit Eurocentric then, you're suggesting, and because it's certainly not either or, is it? And Canada, no. I mean, the Commonwealth even sort of comes to mind, doesn't it? I appreciate Turkey's not in the Commonwealth, but the idea that a world order which is not presided over by the United States is not necessarily exclusively a European-led world order. Or an EU-led world order, if we want to bring Turkey into the mix, which you're right to suggest we would probably have to.
Exactly. I don't think we're being European. I think we need to be European-centric. Europe needs to step up their game and certainly supply more to it. But I think we can't exclude Canada and Turkey in that equation. And I just think it adds much more weight to the fact that NATO, without the US, can still support Ukraine in a very strong way, which I think is critical.
Yes, and I wonder who knows the answer to the question. I mean, van der Leyen's plan with its 5 points looks plausible, but there's no time scale on it. It's just sort of urgently or as soon as possible. The Rearm Europe plan. We are in an era of rearmament. This is where the hyperbole alarm is useless, isn't it? Because she's just correct. There is no alternative. Whatever Donald Trump does next, trust is broken forever. Even if he turned around now and went, ha, April Fool, I love Vladimir Zelensky, and we're not going to pause. The fact that he's done it once means that we can never live again in a world where we're confident that can't happen, that the United States won't lead resistance to oppression.
Exactly. When somebody tells you what they're like, believe them. And in this case, Trump has told us where he stands. I also think Europe needs to get their act together with regards to their military procurement, and as far as we don't need 17 different types of main battle tank. We don't need all these different types of equipment that are specific to countries that makes it even harder on the logistics front to support Ukraine.
We need to be
we don't need American electronics.
Yeah, a homogenous NATO-style union. Yeah. Do you know, and I might ask a few more people this question, because, of course, the man who should be asked it wasn't asked it yesterday. What was the problem with the European army when the Brexit debate was in full swing? What were the actual substantive points backing up the sort of jingoistic rhetoric? Do you know?
No, obviously, I take your point. Surely I want to be part of the army. That isn't attacking me. I want to be part of that. So it makes no sense to me, and it never did make any sense to me. And I think we've never learned the lessons from the 30s, and I hope at this point we can actually not make those mistakes again and get it right this time.
Optimistic?
I wasn't yesterday. I was depressed yesterday. Yeah. But actually today, seeing what von der Leyen has said, I believe the EU can step up. I mean, our military budget, if we would increase our military budget to 2.5%, you're talking about 1.5 trillion compared to the American $1 trillion. And we're only pointing east, and they have to point globally. So I am optimistic if we can get our ducks in a row.
Well, there you go. Thank you, Mark. 10:45 is the time. Turkey is already in NATO, so I don't think there's much point in sending me critiques of Erdogan. I suppose Orban as well. You would point out. You're right. I mean, but that's the thing about alliances, that they're never going to be watertight. It's just a question of what is the best available option for the West, generally speaking, or the UK in particular. It's 10:46. I remember, of course, that the reason why so much of the landscape in the West has been seeded with the idea that the thing you should really be worried about is people crossing the English Channel in a dinghy, or the bloke round the corner who looks a bit foreign, or the immigrant who brought their mum with them. That's not an accident. The way that social media has become absolutely flooded in recent years with that kind of rhetoric, which of course plays perfectly into the hands of traditional commentators who like nothing more than trying to turn ordinary people against each other so that they don't ask questions about why all the money in this country has always coalesced at the very top. But, hey, don't worry about Russia. There's an asylum seeker over there that you could be getting cross about. Where's honest Bob Jenrick at the moment, I wonder? Can we repel Putin, do you think, by painting over some murals? Would that work? Do you think we could send a message to the Kremlin by painting over some cartoons designed to make desperate children feel marginally better than they did before? Well, I certainly hope so.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is, I don't know how relevant it is to the bigger picture, but I do wish we'd had time to spend a little bit more attention on the question of why Israel joined the United States to vote against that United Nations resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I know there's been something of a backlash at home, but coverage of Middle Eastern matters in this country has been absolutely bonkers forever. I don't know the answer to the question of why Israel would choose to throw Ukraine under the bus in this fashion, except, of course, a sort of necessary devotion of Benjamin Netanyahu, not the Israeli people, to Donald Trump, to characters who, I suppose if I were a master of understatement, which I'd not, I would describe as being a little bit Marmite. Do you know the Japanese legend? Someone sent this to me the other day. I hadn't seen it before, but it's one of those things I'm going to be hitting you over the head with for the foreseeable, because it is a perfect distillation of bigger issues. If you get on the wrong train, get off at the nearest station. The longer it takes you to get off, the more expensive the return trip will be. Emma in Benson has saved herself a few quid this morning. She writes, "Oh, James, I rarely agree with anything you say. I'm a Brexiteer who until last week applauded Trump and Farage. And yet today I listen to your show and agree with everything you say. You were right about Brexit, and now I'm terrified to say you are right about impending doom." I hope I'm not conveying impending doom. I'm conveying, I hope, that the scale of the problem that we face, and I'm far from alone in doing so. The head of the European Union describes this as an era of rearmament. There was a superb piece in The Observer not long ago by Andrew Rawnsley pointing out that the will is what has been lacking. Europe does not lack the resources to protect itself without US assistance. The population of Russia is about 144 million. The total population of NATO countries, when you exclude the US, is over 636 million. Their combined economic heft is about 12 times that of Russia. The means are there. What's been lacking is the will. And Rawnsley provides, I hope, Emma, and thank you for those kind words. I get quite a few messages like that, but modesty prevents me from reading them all out. But best to get off the train at the nearest station. Rawnsley also points out that we are moving in the right direction, even before recent events. George Robertson, who was Tony Blair's defence secretary and subsequently a secretary general of NATO, has been leading a strategic defence review. But any attempt to press the snooze button, I think, disappeared, if not last week or the week before in Munich, then this week in the Oval Office. It is 10:53. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm not sure I can play this often enough. The Vice President of the United States of America offering up his tribute to all of the British servicemen and women who made the ultimate sacrifice in support of America's foreign policies in the Middle East.
Give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years.
That's us, by the way, the random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. That's J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States of America, who attempted to claim two things last week. Number one, that Volodymyr Zelensky hadn't said thank you for US support. And number two, that he doesn't need to visit Ukraine to know what's happening there because he can see it all online. And there he is. I mean, that is, I think, extraordinary, truly extraordinary. A moment of absolute horror for people who were clinging on to any vestiges of hope that Pax Americana would survive or America's role on the world stage would sustain or ultimately stay the same. I don't know what all the idiots who claim you should ignore what they say and focus only what they do. I wonder if they lost anyone in Iraq or in Afghanistan. If you just want us all to focus on what they say, on what they do, yeah, and ignore what they say. Oh, don't worry about what they say. Just focus on what they do. Literally, if you lost someone in Afghanistan or in Iraq, how's that working out for you? How's that working out for you? The idea that sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you, when someone like J.D. Vance is dancing on the graves of dead British soldiers. Scumbag. Joshua's in Stuttgart. Joshua, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I've first-time caller, a long-time listener since I've been over here in Europe.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, as an American veteran who worked with the military in NATO and Europe for over 20 years, I'm appalled, just disgusted and ashamed to be an American overseas in Germany. Everything the Kremlin wanted is now what they're getting. It sickens me to see a single presidential administration insult our allies and undo 80 years of stability. I mean, to answer your question, I believe Europe can counter Russia with the funding necessary, but it means that there will be a major impact to the command and control structure. I mean, who is going to lead this European military, and what does that mean for NATO itself? I can't imagine that European countries are going to be in two different command and control structures trying to determine exactly how all of this is going to work. If it's just all about funding Ukraine specifically, then I think that makes sense. But I can even imagine if there's a slow move away from NATO, given that the U.S. doesn't seem, at least the Trump administration seems not committed, that there may be even a new nuclear arms race because the U.S. has the nuclear umbrella in Europe. So, yeah.
This is. I hesitate to use this phrase because it haunts me from when I first used it in a completely different context. But it would be like trying to get the eggs out of a baked cake.
Right.
But we have to try, I think, don't we? I mean,
absolutely. And I mean, all European countries. I mean, I basically decided to stay in Germany, given a lot of the instability in U.S. politics, and was working as a civil service worker in the Department of Defense, and now pretty much a large percentage of people don't feel that that's even a stable job. So it's a pretty strange time to see what the United States is doing, and unfortunately, a vast majority of the population in the U.S. do not own a passport. They don't know global politics. They don't know how important the NATO structure has been since the end of World War II. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say other than that.
Well, that's one of the great anomalies of our age, isn't it? Is that the perception of the United States of America as a homogenous force, a world peacekeeper, is not a perception of the generality of the American population. But if they had all of the facts in front of them, this is an entirely theoretical question, but would most of them share your sense of disgust this morning, do you think?
I think a large percentage of the voting population is not worried about global politics. Yeah. And unfortunately, everything is about the economy, and slowly but surely with tariffs and everything else, we're going to see. The last thing I would say is that I'm hoping that through these incredibly dumb policies that the economy starts to take a hit, so that his popularity just dramatically shrinks. But unfortunately, it's hard to say that even the American population is paying attention.
That is often the way, isn't it? And it puts you in a curious place, Joshua. I was going to ask you whether or not you think that the United Kingdom should continue to share intelligence with Donald Trump's administration, but I don't know if that's a fair question.
Well, given Tulsi Gabbard and some of the other people at that level of the administration, it's hard to say that is going to continue further. But I can't say that for certain.
No, but these are the questions that, I mean, they're generational, and I don't think any of us ever thought that they'd be asked. I never thought I would see the President of the European Commission describing an era of rearmament. I know it's a little bit glib and a little bit unfair to pick on him, but I'll tell you what. You remember when I got back from jury service and I said, I wonder what old Francis Fukuyama has to say about this at the moment. He was a historian we all studied when I was at college in the 90s. Fukuyama was God. Everyone was studying Fukuyama. History is over. The Cold War is finished. The Western liberal ideology has prevailed over the extremes of the right or the left, whether it's Hitler or Stalin. It is a wonderful, brave new world, and we can all relax because it's all over. The absolute corrective to that is the President of the European Commission announcing that we are in an era of rearmament. Wow. A little more on this, I think, is necessary.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 11 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Those Vance comments, I just think that they speak to something much darker and much more sinister than perhaps some people allow, including people who still deign to defend what happened in the Oval Office to Volodymyr Zelensky, or seek to sort of pour oil upon the waters of the turmoil that we're seeing, or use that pathetic phrase that every school child knows is just not true, that sticks and stones may break my bones but words will never hurt me. I think Farage was at it again in the House of Commons yesterday, and Starmer quite rightly put him back in his box and pointing out that we shouldn't really be cozying up to Putin at a time like this. I don't know where to go next. Some days, some weeks, you just feel that you shouldn't really be talking about anything else for at least the first 2 hours of the programme. I don't know that today will extend to 3, and my friend Sir William Browder will join us this hour to discuss this crucial question of frozen billions. It addresses quite a lot of the potential problems that we've focused upon. I'm drawn towards the question about the Kremlin, but I'm also drawn to that analogy of the cake that we touched on a moment ago. Caroline's been in touch from Christchurch. She says, James, we need to bake a new cake. And she's right. You can't get the eggs out of a baked cake. You throw the old cake in the bin. This is where talk of NATO having perhaps begun to have run its course. is pertinent, but it doesn't get replaced by it gets replaced by a sort of de facto NATO without the United States in it. That's all. It's an abdication. I get those words mixed up. An abdication of all responsibility, all leadership by the United States of America under Donald Trump. But what is left will constitute the ingredients of a perfectly adequate cake. It's just a question of how long it takes to bake and whether or not the will to bake it is there. So what does that look like? What does that begin to look like? I'm going to go two ways, I think, this hour. The first is the way in which I thought we'd go in the last hour, but we didn't in the end. Is there any way that you can detach Trump's conduct from Putin's? I mean, is there any way you can dress this up as not being the President of the United States of America doing... And you can't say for certain whatever the President of Russia tells him because you don't know. You have no evidence for that. Occam's razor suggests that that is what is happening here. But he's certainly doing whatever the President of Russia wants. The President of the United States of America is doing everything that the President of Russia wants. That's an incredible thing to say. I mean, the phrase the European Commission president is talking about being in an era of rearmament is shocking enough. And of course, the two statements go hand in hand. One is necessitated by the other. But the President of the United States of America is now doing absolutely everything that the President of Russia might want. And if I said to you, why, what possible answer would you have? Except that he has to. You know? Except that, I mean, I don't think there is leverage. Because I don't think that the tapes that we hear about, or the compromat as it's often called, I think it possibly exists. I don't think that would be a major shock. I think history has taught us that if you were on business in Russia over the last few years and you stayed in a hotel and you succumbed to the attentions of an attractive human being in the hotel bar and went back to your hotel room under the impression either that your charm and your good looks had managed to somehow slay this much younger individual, or that you knew it was going to be an experience that came with an invoice at the end of it, I think it's highly likely that it ended up on film somewhere for whatever reason. That's how the KGB operated. It's how their successors operated. And of course, the President of Russia is nothing if not an ex-KGB man. So I don't think it's impossible that there is compromat. They've even got a word for it. But I don't think it matters, because I don't think that Trump is touchable in that way. I think, as I said yesterday, you could put footage of him in the company of it's like that bloke in the Conservative Chief Whip's new book, 12 naked prostitutes in a brothel in Bayswater. You could put footage of that. 12 naked prostitutes in a hotel room in Moscow with Donald Trump in the middle of it, indulging in all sorts of niche enthusiasms. You could put it on the massive screen in the middle of Times Square, and he'd call it fake news. The absolute cult members would agree. They'd claim it was fake news. Fake news assumes a whole new dimension in the era of AI. You'd plausibly argue that it was fake news anyway, and it wouldn't matter. It's the shooting someone on Fifth Avenue writ large. So I never bought that idea. So what else is there? Why would a president of the United States of America do what the country's sworn enemy wants? Why? What's your answer to that question? I mean, don't go nuts. Don't talk about aliens. But, I mean, we heard one of his sons many years ago talk about how they didn't need American banks anymore. I don't know if you're aware of this. We don't need US banks anymore because we're getting all our money from Russia. So obviously the Trump empire, such as it is, was shored up for years by filthy Russian money. But that doesn't matter because he's president now. You know, he can print dollars. He's opened up a Bitcoin empire on White House turf. So it doesn't matter if they've got him over a barrel financially because he's the president of the United States of America. Why would the president of the US pursue policies that are to a syllable going to delight the president of Russia? I don't know if anyone can answer that question. I'm going to ask it. 0345 6060 973. Why? Why do you think Trump is doing everything that Vladimir Putin might want? That's all. Even if you're not spooked by the horrors of what we're describing, even if you don't care about the collapse of Western unity, even if you're not fussed by the abuse of British soldiers by the Vice President of the United States of America, even if you think that taking the most courageous wartime leader of the 21st century and trying to give him a punishment beating in the Oval Office on live international television isn't the behaviour of a coward and a cad, even if all of those things have somehow failed to land with you in the way that they should, why do you think the President of the United States of America is acting in a way that is absolutely guaranteed to be causing champagne corks to pop at a rate of knots in the Kremlin? Why? 0345 6060 973. And then the second bit of this hour, which is much trickier, and it's slightly inspired by Emma's very kind message. Or not kind, she deserves credit. Why do women find it easier to get off the train than men, do you think? You know, that Japanese proverb that I warned you I was going to be hitting you over the head with for the months to come. If you get on the wrong train, get off at the nearest station. The longer it takes you to get off, the more expensive the return trip will be. Why? Why do we men find it much harder to get off the train, even when the evidence that we've got on the wrong one is absolutely incontrovertible? We still stay on it. We'll be okay. I haven't made a mistake. It's like asking for directions. Men don't like asking for directions. Women will get off the train. Emma got off the train. To be fair, it's taken her 8 years. But the Brexit train, you're going to have to get off it eventually. The Farage train, you're going to have to get off it eventually. The Trump train, if you haven't got off it now, you probably never will. But the question that I want to ask alongside the one about the Kremlin and the White House is about how you feel. And it's why the question about the European army being such an effective rhetorical device during Brexit discussions has baffled me. I can answer almost all Brexit questions. I don't think that makes me sound arrogant. I reckon I could go on, probably if I go back on Mastermind and I need a new specialist subject. See, this makes me sound arrogant after winning last time. Then I could do something Brexity. But what I can answer almost all of the questions. I know how people got persuaded to vote against their own interests. I know how many impulses were harnessed in pursuit of becoming the first population in history to vote to impose economic sanctions on itself. I can answer all of those questions. Was the European army jingoism? Was it the sort of post-Second World War shadow cast over certain generations that made them think that somehow being in the same army as a German would be a disaster or a failure or a betrayal? I ask this generously. I'm not asking this obnoxiously. I mean, it was presented to the British public by the usual suspects as an absolutely unthinkable prospect. There'll be a European army. And I remember sitting here and saying to you, what's wrong with that? What's the army? And I don't know still for sure quite why people used that as a rhetorical device to persuade people to vote against their own interests, to vote indeed for a much less stable Europe, which has rolled out the red carpet for a lot of what we're seeing now. Do you know that while Jason in Montenegro was talking to us about the instability in Serbia, the Serbian opposition party was letting off smoke grenades in the Serbian parliament? I only got told that by a texter who's following Reuters in that part of the world because it hadn't dropped on the wires in this country yet when it happened. Just an illustration, perhaps, of the amazing parts that the show is reaching at the moment. As our caller is describing instability in the Balkans, and particularly in Serbia, which has a Kremlin-facing regime, the opposition in Belgrade are setting off smoke grenades in the actual parliament. That might sound like a big deal, but in the context of the Serbian parliament, that's nowhere near as shocking or as traffic stopping as it would be if it happened in the UK Parliament. How do you feel about a new Europe, which is all of the things that Brexit told you to hate? Oh, I only voted to join a trade association. No, you didn't actually. You were told in 1973 exactly what you were joining, but never mind, that ship has sailed. How do you feel about a new Europe? Isn't that incredible that in the 9 years since Brexit, we've come to, in less than a decade, we've come to a place where nothing feels more urgent or more important than a resurgent, rearmed, utterly united Europe. Oh, my goodness. Listen, when I start talking at the top of an hour, I don't know where I'm going half the time. That's a lie. All the time. But, I mean, that's a thought I haven't had before. Less than a decade from running away from the biggest single market in the world for reasons that most people who voted for it probably can't remember, apart from hating foreigners, of course. In less than a decade, we've come to a place where nothing feels more urgent for the UK self-interest and world peace than a resurgent, rearmed Europe. Two questions there. Am I right? 0345 6060973. And if I am, how do you feel about it? Especially if you voted to destabilise Europe, you voted to disunite Europe, and you did so partly because you were somehow persuaded that a European army would be a really bad thing. There's quite a lot to unpack there. Let me make it simple for you. Question number one, why is the White House doing exactly what the Kremlin wants? 0345 6060973. 2. Are we looking at a resurgent, rearmed, reunited Europe as being the single most important foreign policy position that the United Kingdom can currently pursue? And if so, how do you feel about that? It seems to me to be a moment to just break out of the Brexit spell, to stop paying any heed at all to the clowns and charlatans, the spivs and racists that flogged it to us, and recognise that Europe is strength, Europe is unity, and the more unified it is, the stronger it is. Do you think the UK is ready for that? Are you? 0345 6060973. It's 11:17.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 19 minutes after 11. Sir Bill Braddock will join us at 50:30 to talk us through this frozen asset angle to the question of what on earth Europe does next. I like this from Susan. The question you should be asking today, James, is do you trust Europe more than you trust the United States of America? I, for one, trust Europe 100 times more. I do not trust America anymore because they are behaving treacherously. I thought I had asked that question, but not quite as pithily as you've managed to put it. And there it is. That's huge, isn't it? That's an incredible moment, and we're only 44 days in. But I don't know who would stand up now and say we're a lot safer with the United States of America than we are with Emmanuel Macron or Ursula von der Leyen or the new German Chancellor whose surname is Merz but hasn't been in the job long enough for me to have learnt his Christian name yet. But the problem then, of course, you also have Viktor Orban over in Hungary. You also have very Kremlin-facing movements on the march in Italy, in France, in Germany. The AfD did well. So, you could say we'd put our lot in with... it's almost like there's a plan. It's almost like this hasn't happened by accident. It's almost like having apparent Kremlin puppet in the White House and loads of Kremlin supporting far-right parties on the march in Europe. It's almost as if that hasn't happened entirely by accident and entirely coincidentally, isn't it? I'll leave you to decide which British politician fits into that category of Kremlin-facing, Putin, preening stooge. Tabitha is in Lancaster on that question of either Europe or the Kremlin or both. What would you like to say, Tabitha?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
First-time caller. Sue, I have opinions on both, and let me be clear, they are simply opinions. I've no inside information here.
No, me neither.
If we start with the first question that you were asking about what's motivating the White House to behave as they are doing at the moment,
yes.
There's a number of reasons in my mind why I think Trump's behaving as he is. I think, number one, he's clearly aligned with that kind of thinking to start off with.
Acquisitive. We like the look of that country, so we'll help ourselves. Thank you very much. That's the kind of leader he wants to be.
I think that's very much part of it, and that's part of one of the points I want to make,
yes.
if able. But I also think, actually, just fundamentally on a sort of a political kind of foundational level, he agrees with Putin on many, many issues. I mean, he chose not even to abstain at the most recent UN resolution vote. He actually aligned himself. And prior to that, there was speculation. Is he a Russian agent or has he been corrupted? I think there and then we can establish he's an ally. And thus being an ally, in effect, he's no longer our ally.
He's an ally of the Kremlin. It shouldn't be shocking to hear it with the evidence that's in front of us, but it still is, isn't it?
Well, I think for a lot of people, they are in shock.
Yeah.
I don't think they realise just exactly how far he will go to get a seat at the table in, the future, which, again, it's all pure speculation on my part, and I don't believe these things will happen.
Stop saying that. Don't. A male caller would never say that. We know it's opinion. We know it's speculation.
Okay, so I won't say that anymore. Okay, so, I think he's deluded. Yeah. I think he genuinely believes that there'll be a triumvirate at some point involving the States, China and Russia. Mm. And I think if you only need to look at his expansionist thoughts into Canada, coupled with Peter Navarro's recent legislative attempts to change the border there, that he wishes to occupy the entirety of the Northern Americas. And that obviously will then be in partnership with Putin. And I think Putin's playing him like an absolute fiddle. I'm sure we're all aware of that. And
the man who had his face on the cover of The Art of the Deal, albeit that someone else wrote it and has tried to distance himself from Donald Trump ever since. Some people still using The Art of the Deal as a reason to think that Trump must know what he's doing. Do you think he's being played like a rusty old fiddle by old Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think it goes without saying, really. I mean, I think, interestingly, Mark Burnett, very close ties to Russia, obviously singled him out for The Apprentice. I mean, the irony of all that. The guy is not a deal maker. We saw that on Friday. I can't even begin to express how I felt about watching what happened on Friday, but other than to say that I feel Zelensky really held himself well.
Yes,
and don't get me started on Vance.
No, I mean, he's gone even further since then. So this fits. Just this simple idea that an axis, which the Kremlin said yesterday, I don't know if you saw that from the spokesman, after he used the word aligned or coincides to describe Russian and American foreign policy, he actually said that the world now is Russia, China and the United States of America, and Europe is over. Europe is finished.
Well, I did, and I think this is the thing. I think Putin won't be satisfied with going back to CCP borders. I think he's also got an expansionist viewpoint, and I think this is where he's playing the long game with Trump, deluding Trump into feeling that he will have a seat at the table in that triumvirate. I don't believe for a second that he would permit Trump to continue to be anything other than a vassal state, no matter how much of an expansion Trump goes into. And then potentially for Putin, the long game is to use the American arms and weaponry to then turn around and be an equal foe to China. So, I'm very, very hopeful that these things won't happen. And moving on to your next question, sadly, and I never thought I would ever hear myself say this, I do believe that we need to be focusing on building up Europe and building up a European army.
Why sadly?
Because I think at heart I'm a pacifist.
Oh, I see. So sadly military, not sadly Europe.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
no,
okay.
I'm pro-Europe. I'm a European. Brexit to me has just been an absolute disaster, a sidebar really. And again, I feel that the whole, Cambridge Analytics, we don't need to sort of go there. It's all piecing together now. I'm glad actually in a way that things are happening the way they are doing at the moment though, because we cannot now categorically state that the US is an ally. Trump has proven himself, on national TV with his glib little comments at the end, this will make great TV, that he is no longer an ally to Europe. He's not. He's firmly aligned with Putin. He wants to be a dictator. He's aiming to be a dictator in his own country. You're on blue sky. You know full well what's actually going on on the ground over there.
Yeah.
And I think as far as Europe are concerned, I was absolutely mortified on Friday, and I was terrified for Zelensky's safety and well-being until he landed at number 10. I thought Charles played a blinder. I really do, welcoming in, and especially on the back of the invite earlier on last week to Trump, which we're debating in our friend group whether or not that should be rescinded or should it be kept there as a little carrot. But just as much as Putin can't be trusted to keep any form of peace deal or ceasefire, I firmly believe now that neither can Trump. It's already leaked that the State of the Union, he intends to declare his withdrawal from NATO. He spoke about that at length in his last term. And also it's mooted that he may be even wishing to withdraw from the UN. How true that is at this stage, I don't know.
That speech is coming up, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So for me, the State of the Union's a very
It's not
important
technically.
one.
Don't make me be a pedant. Don't make me be a pedant. It's not technically a State of the Union address, but it is. It's in the same space. I forget why it's not technically a State of the Union address. I read it in a headline in Time magazine. So just.
They're referring to it as the State of the Union in the States, aren't they? I mean, you'll know yourself on Blue Sky AOC has asked for a crowdsourced response. I think it's very interesting times. I'm not in the least bit bleak-hearted about what's happening, although it is a roller coaster. I do believe that, the speech that the Danish PM gave that you quoted earlier on, I heard that a couple of days ago, and I feel that the unification process, we're as close to being reunified with Europe as we can be, which is only good news.
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, my enemy's enemy is my friend, or you only really wake up and smell the coffee when your back's against the wall, to mix several metaphors in one go. Do you have any idea why the spectre of a European army was so effective during the Brexit debate?
I think it's, you see, an Englishman...
Because it feels incredibly stupid now.
Absolutely. I think an Englishman's home is his castle, and we're an island, and you have that islander mentality and these bloody foreigners, inverted commas. Yeah. And, I mean, all that has just absolutely melted away over the weekend's press. And I think that we were reliant on the states. We believed that the states would hold to the agreements that had been put in place. I mean, honestly, if I'd have been physically in the room with J.D. Vance, I'd have slapped the reminder of the 1994 agreement with Ukraine right across his face.
Yeah.
So, I mean...
And that's not the only thing that Russia has reneged on. It's not the only, as you know, not the only abandoned treaty or the abandoned pledge. Because you can trust Vladimir Putin about as far as you can throw Donald Trump.
Well, they're peas in a pod. I mean, they really are.
Except for the point you've made, which is he wants them to be peas in it. I mean, they're peas in a pod, but when you open a pod and there's like 8 really healthy peas and then one little weird stunted one at the end of the pod, that's Donald Trump. But they are in the same pod. That's a great analogy. It's yours. I ran with it. They are peas and they are in the same pod. And the tiny little stunted pea is desperate to be like the big fat juicy pea, but he isn't. And that's where the delusion comes. That's a brilliant analysis. Thank you. And you brought it in bang on 11:30. You should be doing my holiday cover. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 33 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where for what feels like the only subject in town continues to demand our attention and indeed command our attention. You have heard, in fact, if you were lucky enough to hear Bill Browder on this programme, long before he became something of a fixture in television and radio studios and indeed newspapers in the United Kingdom, then you would have been among the least surprised members of our population in the UK about the direction of traffic that has been taken by the Kremlin over the last few years. I don't know that anyone, him included, was prepared to see what many of my contributors have described as an ally of the Kremlin take up residence in the actual Oval Office. But it is, and Bill joins me now, it is one of those situations where there is absolutely no pleasure whatsoever in being proved right, Bill.
No, I'm in a state of absolute shock, even though I could see it all coming. It's like somebody with a terminal illness that's close to you, and when they die, you still feel terrible. That's how I feel right now. America was, for me, when in all of my work fighting Putin, my biggest ally. They were stalwart. They were always much faster and much more deliberate than the UK or Europe when it came to Putin in Russia. And now all of a sudden, America has switched sides. Donald Trump has now become an ally of Putin and an enemy of Ukraine and an enemy of I guess, people who are enemies of Putin. And so and of course we can't even begin to calculate the damage that's going to do to our lives going forward in so many different ways.
When did you finally move into that space, just out of interest? When would you finally have stopped resisting the perfectly natural psychological temptation not to say the word ally out loud?
Well, I guess it would probably have been when the when the United States voted at the UN alongside Iran, North Korea, and Russia against the Ukraine resolution calling Russia an aggressor and condemning the invasion, which happened, I guess, a week and a half ago. I mean, but it's been building up. I mean, I was at the Munich Security Conference, and we saw this unbelievable attack on the UK, on Germany, on Romania by the Vice President J.D. Vance. Didn't say anything bad about Russia, just about us. Called us, the risk is for us to be Soviet, and so on. And
incredible.
I mean, it's sort of built up, and it's gotten to the point now where that of course the Oval Office, the haranguing, the shouting, the bullying in the Oval Office last Friday, and then of course all that was just virtual. That was sort of signaling, but what we saw last night is that the U.S. has cut off military aid for Ukraine, and that's material, that's real, that's life and death, and it's just happened.
And it's still not quite believable. Before we move on, as I want to the question of the frozen assets that you have been campaigning for the release of now pretty much since the war started, since the invasion took place. I don't know if this is an appropriate question, Bill, so forgive me if you don't want to answer it. But in your work in getting the Magnitsky sanctions in place around the world, few American politicians were more committed to that cause than the late John McCain.
Yeah.
And I would be surprised if your thoughts hadn't turned in the last few days to what he would have made of this.
Well, I can only imagine him literally spinning at high speeds in his grave right now.
Yeah.
And it's not just him. George W. Bush, the Bush Presidential Center, just wrote a big piece, saying, Ukraine is our friend, Russia is our enemy. Don't do this. I mean, it's every person who is a Republican, a real Republican, should be just sickened by this whole thing. And this is not republicanism. This is not conservatism. This is something different. And it's just horrifying. It's just absolutely horrifying. And what's interesting is actually watching some of the far right in Europe trying to figure out what to do with this, because it's a vote loser. It's a vote loser for Nigel Farage. It's a vote loser for there was a French far right guy who showed up in Florida at the MAGA convention last week, and he couldn't quite get there because of the Nazi salute of Steve Bannon. And so these guys have gotten so far, it's kind of hard to even see how it's all going to play itself out.
So we come then to the question of the moment, which is the likelihood of Europe being able to fill what looks set to be a permanent hole in the support of Ukraine left by Donald Trump's abdication of all responsibility and support, which makes the $300 billion in Russian state assets currently held by Western banks urgent. What have been the major obstacles so far? Because I know you and people like Kira Rudik, who has also been on the programme many times, the opposition MP in Ukraine. What have been the obstacles so far? What's the thing you're most often told by world leaders about why they haven't done it already?
Well, there's sort of two main points. One is they don't want to upset the value of the currency. They think that somehow if we were to confiscate the Russian central bank reserves, people wouldn't want to keep their money in the UK or the euro. And then the second is that, and by the way, I think that's nonsense. I've been in the financial markets my whole life. I don't think anyone's going to, not purchase a property here or make an investment here because they're worried about that. Because, unless you're a country invading a sovereign neighbor, your money is going to be safe. And then the second argument is, well, it's the Russian money is protected by international law and sovereign immunity. And my response to that is, yeah, that's true, but also Ukraine's sovereignty is protected by international law and the law on countermeasures, which means you're not allowed to go and destroy another country and not have to pay for it. And when two laws conflict, you've got to figure out which law dominates. And obviously, the damage, Russia shouldn't be sort of uniformly protected in their money when they've done such a terrible crime. And there's clearly a legal way to frame this whole issue. And really, it doesn't come down to any of these two things. It comes down to political will.
Right.
And political will, in my mind, it should be very simple. We can't afford to have Ukraine collapse, because if it does, the consequences are unimaginable. We'll have 20 million Ukrainian refugees fanning out across Europe and the UK. We'll have to increase defense spending to 7% when Russia starts threatening Estonia or Poland, our allies. And so we're going to have to fill in the gap of the American money. And we've got this money sitting there. And so why should the British taxpayer do this when Putin can pay for the money, pay for the gap in the money? And we got Putin's money, and we should do it. And it's just the most obvious thing in the world. And I'm almost sure at this stage of the game, based on Trump's decision to suspend military aid to Ukraine, that this will push it over the line. It just can't not.
A word, if you would, on that conflation of oligarchs' money with Putin's money, how it is that they are effectively one and the same.
Well, the oligarchs are looking after Putin's money. Putin has given the oligarchs a license to steal in exchange for him getting half their money. But I should make it very clear, the money I'm talking about confiscating today is the Russian government central bank reserves. There's a lot of oligarch money that's floating around out there that we can hopefully sanction and confiscate at some point in the future, but that's not what we're talking about today. Yes, that's going to take courts and time and so on. But the Russian government launched a war of aggression against Ukraine unprovoked. The damage done by that war is $500 billion to $1 trillion. We have custody of their money. There's no question that money should go to Ukraine at this point to defend themselves, and hopefully if they successfully defend themselves, then at some point to reconstruct. But it's an urgent emergency situation right now, and any more dithering is just going to lead to unbelievable costs, not just for the Ukrainians but for us if we don't act.
The clock is ticking. I didn't realize this until I read your article today in the Daily Mail, and it's a testament to my respect for you, Bill, that I read an article in the Daily Mail all the way to the end, because the clock is ticking with regard to sanctions and an upcoming European Council vote.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that's most scary about the whole thing, is that in order to keep the money frozen, and the 200 billion, more than 200 billion, is frozen in Europe under EU sanctions. And in order to keep that money frozen, you've got 27 EU member states that have to come to a unanimous consensus to do so. And they have up until now. But Hungary, Putin's big friend over there, Viktor Orban, he wants to end these sanctions. And he could, in July, say, I'm not going to approve them anymore, in which case the 200 billion goes back to Russia. It no longer sits in Europe. They have now 200 billion more to fight and destroy Ukraine, and Ukraine doesn't have anything, and then we have to, if we want to help the Ukrainians fight back, we have to then raise our percentage tax rate by 2 or 3%.
Finally, and this is outside your purview really, but I suspect you know more about it than I do. How easy is it to translate that $300 billion into measurable aid for Ukraine? I mean, how are the channels of expenditure there? Is it simply a case of replacing one source of funding with another source of funding, or will there be very, very hard work to do to get those wheels turning?
Very, very hard work to do. I mean, the Americans were the main, the military-industrial complex in America is much more functional than ours. And it was all working, not even as well as anyone would have hoped it was working. Now we have to completely restructure the whole thing, and that's gonna be very hard. And a lot of places there will be gaps. I mean, there's no way to spin this other than a total humanitarian disaster for Ukraine. What's happened overnight?
Sir Bill Browder, many thanks indeed. And if you want to find out more about Bill's work and indeed his life, you could do a lot worse than read his 2 books, Red Notice, A True Story of Corruption, Murder and One Man's Fight for Justice, and Freezing Order, A True Story of Russian Money Laundering, State-Sponsored Murder and Surviving Vladimir Putin's Wrath. And also, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, the man who alerted me many, many, many years ago, largely because he was sitting in the back of a taxi listening to me spout ill-informed, not nonsense, but let's just say ill-informed opinions about some of the issues that have progressed and come to fruition subsequently, and asked to come on the programme in order to tell me the story of his lawyer and friend Sergei Magnitsky, who was killed in a Russian prison. It is 11:46. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I told you, haven't I, about, I don't know what you call it. It's a form of I don't think it's intellectual insecurity. Actually, it is normality bias. It's why I like to speak to people like Bill, but I don't like what I hear. People who follow events. You know, it's my job to follow events, so I have the luxury of having a little bit more time and energy to do so than perhaps you do. But some people live it, you know, and we do 3 topics a day normally. Some people have got life missions to address one issue. And to hear him describe Donald Trump as an ally of Vladimir Putin. And don't forget, on a personal level, at one meeting between Putin and Trump 1.0, the Russian president raised the prospect of the American president handing over the guest you just heard on this programme. So he knows what he's talking about. And that normality bias, or that fear of hyperbole, sometimes combine to chill you and to make you think we can't go there. I thought that when I read this from Kate. I'm a bit behind listening. I love it when people listen on catch-up, Kate. I'll see you in about 20 minutes, all right, when you hear me reading this out. But I saw a meme that resonated with me the other day. If you ever wondered how you would behave in 1930s Germany, you're doing it now. And again, there's part of you that goes, oh, calm down. And another part of you that goes, crikey, yeah. It's kind of why I opened the show with that article from Harper's Magazine in 1942. Would you be a Nazi or something like that? I forget what it's called exactly, but I've shared it a couple of times on Blue Sky. These are unprecedented times. There's always a possibility, I suppose, that he'll press reverse and everything will revert to normal by the end of next week. But I think it's becoming increasingly laughable and forlorn, that hope. And we shall see what he says in tonight's speech, which is not a State of the Union address because he's the new president. He would have to have been president for the last year in order to have delivered the State of the Union. So that's all. Even though he's a second-term president, it's not a second consecutive term. But these are pub quiz trivialities. Charlotte is in, I've never heard of it before, Dull in Aberfeldy. Charlotte, let's hope that's not nominative determinism. What would you like to say?
Hello, James. Good morning.
Hello.
Hello. We have actually spoken before and we have discussed the location of Dull. So, yeah, I work, my thesis is in American strategic culture, which examines the way and why America does things that it does.
This is your PhD thesis?
This is my PhD thesis, Shadows of Arlington. And it has come as no surprise to me, the behaviour of what Trump has been showing over the last year or so. He is an ally with Putin. He always has been and always will be. And I firmly believe that we are being manipulated by Moscow and Beijing in the information that he is being provided. And this is because Moscow and Beijing have for a very long time understood the United States of America and the way it conducts itself in the world better than those running the country. And this is clearly happening now because of the level of nepotism within the Trump administration.
Just a little more on that. What do you mean by that?
So for example, you know, it's a difficult one. It's just sort of like the level of information and how, when I was listening to them discuss, you know, the fact that they have so much misinformation and they're about these situations that they're obviously having to make decisions about. at the moment, we're seeing the United States display its natural tendency for isolationism.
Oh wow!
At its worst level ever.
Yeah. So this is a propaganda victory. I mean, we talk a lot about the radicalised online right, but they've got control of the
narrative.
The information narrative reaching the White House.
Yeah, and it's through
the
sort of like deception. For a very, very long time. The US used it against Moscow during the Cold War. It's this misinformation, drip-feeding information, running the narrative in the media. And, Putin's been doing this from the very, very beginning. We were taught at Hull not to trust a word Putin said. Yeah. And this is when we were all supposed to be friends with Putin because he was helping us in Afghanistan and, other areas. Yeah. But, these alliances and these people have been chosen specifically. And I'm not trying to go down the conspiracy theory. It's how the intelligence world works. It's how information and power is. It's all soft power, James.
If the CIA can get somebody at the top of a foreign government, why can't the Kremlin? And it doesn't involve a Manchurian candidate. It involves creating the ecosystem in which that could happen.
And it's the influence. It's the people who surround them. For example, George Bush Senior he found it really important that if his son ran for presidency, he had to have Condoleezza Rice in the White House. Yeah. Because he knew the neocons within the American establishment would be pushing
would have his son's ear. They'd have his son's ear.
Yeah. And Condoleezza Rice could filter that information because she was trained in international relations.
Wow.
It was the same with Madeleine Albright. America is not a naturally warfaring nation.
No,
it was born out of wanting protection and defence. And yes, it is very good at diplomacy and it has excelled in diplomacy. However, what Vance was saying the other day is completely untrue. That's gunboat diplomacy and it's absolutely appalling. I mean, and you sit watching this unfold and people say, well, why is this happening? How's this happening? And it's basically the minds who have run this narrative have tapped into this caution and this America First approach, and this is why we are where we are with Trump.
I get that, and I mean, my normality bias is kicking in a bit, but you've got all your ducks in a row, so it would be pointless to give voice to that. The only bit missing is what's in it for Trump in his own mind.
I don't know. I mean, no. I have purposely avoided trying to look at Trump's socialization and, the way his brain works.
Sure.
My point is that as, we are in this situation, this is the reality. And I'm an advocate of basically we need to move our alliance and our thinking and our work to Canada and to Australia. They are two such important allies. And we undervalue them. Canada is significantly undervalued by countries like the United States, but it has a fantastic military. It has a fantastic intelligence services. They have such a fantastic knowledge and understanding of how Russia operates. Yeah. There was we were taught always, which side would you choose? Canada or Australia, when the North Sea Passage melts. And, it was all these kind of ideas we were taught to ask.
Canada or Russia?
No.
Canada or Australia?
Or America.
You said Australia.
America.
You said
Sorry,
Australia. No, I knew you didn't mean Australia, but I got it wrong as well.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. I thought that's some passage if it's separating Canada from Australia.
No, sorry.
No, don't apologise. I just wanted to be clear that I knew what you were talking about.
Yeah, no. So choose Canada or the United States and run that as a scenario.
Yeah.
Because it's all about shipping lanes. It's all about trade. It's all about soft power and business. And this is how Trump talks. It's business, business, business. Let's rebuild and make America lots of money.
Forget about what's doing right. Just do what.
Look
let's
at
just do what makes us rich.
How and it plays to him. Oh, let him have, these Palestine. Let him rebuild Syria. Yeah. And they'll be promising him all these things, and he'll be lapping it up as though he believes it. Oh, well, they've promised me this. Because that's the type of person he is. But at the same time, the rest of us, we need to sort of like look very closely at how can we stand in a collective defence security organisation that does not require the United States.
In terms of what would become Four Eyes in a way, wouldn't it, as opposed to Five Eyes? It's not an alternative to rebuilding and rearming Europe. It is in addition to, isn't it?
In addition, I would definitely. Canada and Australia need to be brought in on this, and we need to take leads, even if it's not us. I mean, we were taught if you don't run the show runs you, and this is what has been happening. And yes, Russia has, for a long time, has been running the show without us realising. All the, from the mid-1990s, Blair and everybody were chummy with the Russians, and a small group of academics, we were made to feel like, the Russians are our friends. Well, no, they're not, actually. We need to be very, very careful, and we need to be monitoring them, and we took our eyes off them.
I think of Fiona Hill, actually, as in the same sort of space around the same sort of time. Charlotte, thank you. You've taken me right up to the wire. I hope you'll call me again. I'm sorry we kept you on the switchboard for so long. We're just bombarded today, and I wanted to focus on the European angle before we moved on to alternatives or supplementaries. But yeah, I mean, crikey, in the context of resistance, the idea that our historical allies, and of course there are cultural ties with Canada and with Australia, not least Commonwealth ties that speak to a UK perspective on unity that would be separate from the European project. But we're in a position of being able to do both. And we would have been even if we were still in the European Union. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise on that. I've had 2 or 3 messages inspired by Emma in Benson from people explaining to me how they're now getting off the train they got onto in 2016. I hope you'll allow me to share a couple of those with you shortly. But in the next hour, we are going to do, in the words of Monty Python, and now for something completely different.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 12, and although it may feel like a crunching gear change, I do feel almost a sort of psychic need to talk about something else for an hour. I'm sure Sheila will be returning to matters foreign policy and matters Ukraine-US at 1 o'clock, if not shortly afterwards. But I want to weigh back into rather more low-octane domestic issues, if that's all right with you. One of the subjects that has, over the years, proved to be one of the most popular on the programme, and of course one of the most important. And I worry that we're no clearer now about the answers to the questions that I'm about to ask you that we are than we were when we first started doing it. You would have thought, wouldn't you, given the obviousness of the issue and the ease with which it can be identified, that dealing with obesity in children in particular would have been done and dusted by now. Yeah, I mean, you just would, right? You would have thought that a few years ago, the balloon went up, everybody got very agitated about the fact that young people were shortening their lives and compromising their health and diminishing their very existence by consuming the wrong things and the wrong amount of the wrong things. Every time someone tried to help, and this may be part of the answer to the questions, every time somebody tried to help, the usual suspects would be queuing up to condemn the people trying to help. It's where the phrase nanny state comes from. Of course it is. It's where the phrase nanny state comes from. And you remember the attacks that Jamie Oliver was subjected to when he sought to revolutionise school dinners with some great success, but elements of the media, and of course some people who rely on those malign elements of the media for their opinions, whether they're paid to share their opinions or not, are very much part of this problem. A lot of that sort of transmogrified into attacks on Jamie Oliver. A championing of the women at the school gates, themselves often obese, pushing sausage rolls through the chain-link fences so that their poor children didn't have to endure freshly cooked food for their midday meal. So that might be part of it. I mean, that big national level question of why this is getting worse, not better. More than a third of UK children aged between 5 and 9 are on course to be obese or overweight by 2050. So by the time they're in their 30s. It has been described as a monumental societal failure in research published in the Lancet medical journal. It is the most comprehensive global analysis of obesity rates to date. For British children aged 5 to 14, obesity rates could rise from 12% in girls to 18.4% in 25 years' time, and for boys from 9.9 to 15.5. Key words here are rise and societal and failure. Because if this is, and you know that it is, one of those subjects that we have circled back to time and time and time again on this programme, and I am not very often a trawler, I am almost always a seagull. I don't set the news agenda, I report on it and I comment on it, and I invite you to do the same. But the trawlers have been pretty commonplace as well. Childhood obesity has been a conversation that I think we've been having in this country, whether on radio stations or privately, in newspaper articles or at work, at home, at school, for over 20 years. Certainly all the time that I've been doing this job. I remember I used to say things to you, like when I was at school, the overweight lads had nicknames because they stood out so much. There would be one or two in each class, and we had a particularly pungent maths teacher, brilliant at maths, not so good at political correctness. We had a particularly pungent maths teacher who would invent, dare I say, quite funny nicknames for the most obviously overweight lads. It wasn't a massive curse. It didn't involve bullying, largely because of rugby. And they were very good on the rugby pitch quite often, the big lads. Not least when you if they hit puberty early, you could just say, give it to Keith, give it to Keith. And Keith would then just wade through school children as a sort of little mini man in waiting. And if he was a couple of stone overweight as well, then the kids would fall over even more. Keith is a surname in this context, obviously, at my prep school, like Penelope Keith or John Keith. But that's not true anymore. I mean, now at some schools, at some primary schools, because we're talking about children aged between 5 and 9, the children who we would describe as overweight are not in a tiny minority anymore. And yet we've talked about it endlessly. So there's one question here, which is why, but there are actually 4 questions. Three questions. Any advance on 3? 2? 3. There's 3 questions. Going once, going twice, 3 questions on this subject. The first is, and I'm going to ask it, and you're hopefully going to answer it. Why is your child obese? 0345 6060 973. Why is your child obese? Okay. You might not know the answer to that. You can ring in and tell me that. But why? 0345 6060 973. Because if you're listening to this programme, then you don't really have the excuse of ignorance, do you? You can't really say, I've no idea. I mean, who knows? You must know all of the lecturing sometimes and sometimes sort of less preachy information that has been put in front of you. You must know that in all things moderation. So you must know that letting your children have family-sized bags of crisps. Look, anyway, I don't want to put answers in your mouth. Why is your child overweight? 0345 6060 973. And I'm certainly not here to judge. I think this is as you'll discover, this is a much bigger issue than individual family dynamics allow. Here's a prediction. Many more people will answer this question than the last one. Ready? Why is your child not overweight? 0345 6060 973. A genuine question. Why is your child not overweight? I tell you, like, there's 4. Because the third one I've only just thought of, and this will probably be my favourite. Third question, why is your child not overweight anymore? Why is your child not overweight anymore? So to recap, why is your child overweight? Why is your child not overweight? And why is your child not overweight anymore? And then the 4th question, which is the one I like, the one I can answer. Why is this a societal issue? Why is this something that is not the responsibility of parents or of teachers or of the individuals themselves? Why is this a societal failure? Why is this being described correctly, in my view, as a monumental societal failure. Why has, in your view, Jonathan wants to know what position Penelope Keith played in my prep school rugby team. She's just the first person I could think of who had the surname Keith. Seriously, although she probably would have got a game in the third 15. Anyone could get into that side, me included. I want to know all of the information, think about the show. If you've listened to it for a while, think about all the other shows on LBC. We all talk about this a lot. And that is because it is always in the news. There are always stories. There are always campaigns. There are always individuals in the public eye working in the area of healthy eating, of childhood obesity, not just Jamie, Hugh Fernley Whittingstall, all of them. Loads and loads of people, loads of energy, loads of effort, authentic, well-meaning, generous effort put into the mission to help parents help their children not be obese. Why has it failed? 0345 6060 973. Some answers will be obvious. Some will not. I have a pet theory on this that involves the secretly funded lobby groups that masquerade as think tanks and educational charities and congregate around a little corner of Westminster at which a street called Tufton is at the centre. I'll explain a little bit more about that later in the programme. But that's the key question. How have decades of effort in the area of education and public health failed so badly that children in the years to come are going to be more obese than they were in the years past? So, the 4 questions. Why is your child, or why is one of your children overweight? Why is one of your children not overweight? Why is one of your children not overweight anymore? And how can such an avalanche of education, public health, promotion and celebrity endorsement have failed to make much impact, or any impact perhaps, on this, forgive me, ballooning problem? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. I'd tell you, here's a moment, Keith. Going to hit this one bang on time. That's the first time since what? 2023? It is 12:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 17 minutes after 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The problem with this is it becomes a potentially a battleground with smug parents lining up on one side to explain why their children aren't overweight, and beleaguered parents lining up on the other to explain why theirs are. So I suppose in some ways what the ideal would be the mother of identical twins, one of whom weighed 3 stone more than the other, and then we could try to work, because some of it is genetic, obviously. I used to be a little bit dismissive of that claim, but you know it's true. You know people whose metabolisms are like nuclear powered. They can eat a horse every day and not put a pound on, and then other people, a moment on the lips, a lifetime on the hips. So in terms of individuals, we'll get stuck into that shortly, but in terms of society, why do you think, and of course you don't need any skin in the game to answer this question, why do you think the epic effort that's been put into this issue has apparently failed? What's on the other side? What's lined up on the other side of the battlefield? If on this side you've got education, public health, schools, schemes, Jamie Oliver, all of it, what's on the other side that has prevailed so apparently so completely? Aisha is in Newham. Aisha, what would you like to say?
Hello, I'm a first-time caller, but I'm your big fan.
Well, what do you mean you're my big fan? I may have more than one big fan. I hope I do.
Sure you do.
But for now, you're the only one I need, Aisha. What would you like to say?
Okay, so I'm just basing it on my children. I've got 2 boys, 23 and 15. They've always been very slim.
Right.
The reason why I feel they're very slim, I think there's a number of reasons. One of the biggest ones is home-cooked food. I do cook every single day. They have, even like the 15-year-old, when he comes back from school, he'll have a proper meal. And then he'll have dinner as well at 7:30.
Gosh.
So we mostly have home-cooked food. We do have takeout, but it's not on a regular basis, not even once a week. Once in a while, yeah, we will go out to eat or we'll order in. But the main thing is home-cooked food.
And how big a hassle is that for you? Have you always been like that? Were you raised that way? So it's just it's part of your routine? Because people listening will be saying, I haven't got the time, I haven't got the energy, this woman probably doesn't work.
I do.
I know you do.
I'm a working mother.
I know you do. I was just setting it up for a little bit of dramatic tension on the radio. So how do you account for the fact that you can find the time and the energy to do this when many people claim that they can't?
Yeah, and I totally understand. For a lot of people, it's so much easier and sometimes cheaper as well to actually just grab food from outside. And I totally get that. For me, I suppose it's the way I was raised. I was always raised with home-cooked food. And so it was the norm for me when I had my boys that obviously I have to make home-cooked food. Whether I'm working, whether I'm rushed off my feet is irrelevant. It's got to be done. It doesn't take that long, James. An hour. I can fit an hour into my day.
No, I like it, and you're not sounding smug, so thank you for that. But I'm interested in why 15-year-olds generally, I can't say that in the context of the statistics that we're exploring today, but you're never going to burn food faster than you do when you're 15, I don't think, especially if you're a boy and you play sport and that kind of thing. But it doesn't matter what's happening at home for a lot of these kids, because they'll be getting a bag of chips on the way back from school, or they'll be stuffing their face at the first opportunity with, sacks of Haribo on the back of the bus. So how have you managed in that area, if indeed you have?
They do eat junk food. They do eat chocolate. They do eat sweets on a daily basis.
Well, how do we know you're not just lucky? Are you slim?
No, I'm not. But this is the other thing.
Is that what you meant when you said you were my big fan? I couldn't resist. That's appalling. I'm so sorry.
You saw through that one, didn't you?
I'm so sorry. That was pathetic. But is their dad thin, slim?
Their dad is naturally slim.
Well, there you go, you see. So that's got to help.
Yes, 100%. And also they do, they're not a sporty people, my boys, but they do walk, like it's a long walk to school. Yeah. My older son, he does walk a lot. So I think that helps as well. So I think it's a combination of food, exercise and genetics.
And have you ever worried that they were going in the wrong, had a wobble? Perhaps literally, they were going in slightly the wrong direction and you thought, I need to get on top of this as their mum, or have they always been on this path?
They've always been slim.
Yeah, okay. No, you're lucky.
They've always been naturally slim, yeah. I am quite lucky in that.
No, definitely. And I think it's important to recognise that, because there'll be mums listening to this who've got two children who have got completely different genetic constructions, completely different metabolisms. And one of the big things in the future is going to be more and more of these individual analyses of what food works for you and what food doesn't. Some of the people I know who've done that, you can see them, they've got little devices stuck to their arms. Have you seen that? And it tells them, you need to stay away from broad beans or something. And that's going to be a big part of it as well. Two children on the same diet can have completely different results. Aisha, thank you. It's been one of those days where my female callers have been absolutely smashing it out of the park. Long may it continue. Simon is in Chiswick. Simon, what would you like to say?
Hey, James, how are you doing? I wanted to talk about my son. During the first lockdown, I've got twins, a male and a female, and there were 10 during lockdown. The boy got really big during the first lockdown. We were all locked in the house. You know what it was like. And then when we decided, he got quite upset about that, as you would.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so we went into the second lockdown and we said, right, what are we going to do here? And I can cook. I'm a chef by trade, or was in my early life. So I started cooking and we were exercising 4 to 5 kilometres a day. And we're talking about a 30, 40-minute walk. Yeah. I mean, it's not a lot. And just to address your previous caller, the cooking side of it, if you're freezing food, if you've got a freezer, you're talking about an hour a month. You make 4 or 5 batch dishes, bolognese or whatever, and this is a lot cheaper than going to the supermarket and buying
a ready meal. What were you doing before? What were you doing during lockdown when he put on pounds?
It kind of caught us by surprise, actually. We were doing nothing. We literally sort of going, this is going to be 2 or 3 weeks. The school obviously
But food-wise, what were you doing? I love the fact that you were doing nothing. Absolutely nothing, James. It was fantastic.
What I was doing. I was thinking at 9
Not you.
in the morning. What were
you doing food-wise? Because you say you started cooking after you'd clocked the fact that he was getting a bit unhappy about his own condition.
We were basically big breakfast, big lunch, sandwich, sausage roll, whatever, and then the big evening meal. But the biggest thing wasn't actually the food; it was the exercise.
Okay.
So my boy's now touching 14, and like all teenagers, loves his PlayStation and stuff. But he's also really into football.
Yeah.
So he's out 2-3 times a week playing football, running around.
It's such a game changer, isn't it? What if he didn't fancy it? What if he didn't? I mean, what do you do then? You've got to find some way of getting the heart rate up. Yeah. There is no alternative. There's no shortcut or hack or plan B, is there?
Well, I disagree in the slightest. Just that I think cooking batch meals, so literally whenever you get a Chinese or an Indian or a fish and chips, whatever, keep the plastic containers. You could do a pasta bolognese for $5, and you've got 4 or 5 meals for 2 kids out of that. And then all you need is a pack of pasta for a quid.
I think you're right, and I think some people can't cook. There's a story in the paper today, I mean, there would be, wouldn't there, because it's Pancake Day, about how half the population can't make pancakes. I don't know whether that's a reflection specifically on pancake skills or cooking skills in general, but yeah, people are intimidated by it. But again, you know, you think of all the effort that's been put into this. A lot of the stuff you've just said, I've heard said time and time again by prominent people, public figures, government figures, educational figures, and yet some of it hasn't landed. I didn't mean that. I wasn't doubting your culinary or Tupperware advice there, Simon. I was just saying that the exercise is key. I mean, you could do all the effort in the world on diet, but you're going to need to do some exercise as well if you're a teenager.
Absolutely. And I just wonder, I mean, your question about why did Jamie Oliver's thing land so badly?
Well, it didn't. It did really great work, but it landed badly in some elements of the media.
Yes, but I don't get why. It was a really beautiful thing. He did an amazing thing.
Yeah, well, I know why.
Okay. James, just before I go, I just want to say, the kid I'm talking about has actually screamed at you in public. We walked past you in the area where you live during lockdown, and I said, "Oh, that's James O'Brien." And my son turned to you and screamed at the top of his voice, "My dad hates Brexit too." So just to let you know, you've actually met the guy I'm talking about.
Oh, that's lovely. And I look forward to the next time, Simon. I really do. 12:27. My dad hates Brexit too. Yeah, that's lockdown. I got quite a lot of that kind of thing during lockdown, but possibly not quite as exuberantly as that. And there it is, you know. Some of this stuff is obvious, some of it is not. And the society element of it, why is it a monumental societal failure? If Simon's lad was still big, it would be Simon's fault. Or if you're feeling particularly cruel, it would be the lad's fault. The reason why it lands badly in the media, if you're wondering why I said that, is because of the things that I've told you a million different times. You know, it's so much easier to wake up in the morning, pick a target, and then encourage my listeners to attack that target. Who should we do today? I mean, sometimes it's going to be entire demographics of people. Should we do immigrants? Should we do Muslims? Should we do single mothers? That's gone out of fashion lately because there's so many of them. What are we going to do? Oh, I know. Let's do Meghan Markle. That's always good. And so we'll do Jamie Oliver. What day is it? Thursday. Yeah, we're attacking Jamie Oliver today. Friday, you say, Gary Lineker. What's Gary Lineker done now? Monday? Oh, Meghan Markle. Down with Meghan Markle. Who's on Tuesday? Probably Carol Vorderman. It's time she got a kicking, isn't it? Miriam Margolyes. Who's it going to be next? So that's why some corners of the media choose to be unpleasant and lazy, when the alternative is so much more nourishing. If not literally, then certainly for the soul. The number you need. Why is... the questions about your own family are obvious, but why is this a societal issue? A few of you reminded me of Chris Van Tulleken's book on ultra-processed food, which is... I mean, I haven't read it all. I keep meaning to, but I can't forgive him for beating me to the number 1 slot in the book charts. There are 6 companies that provide in excess of 85% of ultra-processed food worldwide. A large number of obesity studies have been sponsored directly or indirectly by the actual ultra-processed food companies. So it is almost like an international conspiracy to keep us in the dark about what we're putting in our own bodies and what we're putting in our children's bodies. So what is the biggest takeaway so far from the first 2 parents on the programme? Cook your own food. And it possibly is that simple. It possibly is that simple. In terms of the biggest building blocks, if you think of the effort that's put into persuading you not to cook your own food, then the reason why the massed ranks on the other side of the battlefield have apparently failed just comes down to logistics. There will be echoes here of the conversation about Ukraine and Russia in the first hour. It's just a question of who's got the biggest weapons, who's got the most ordnance, who's better funded, who's got the biggest loudhailers, and you tell me. And then, of course, it's not enough to be able to influence research. It's not enough to be able to buy advertising. It's not enough to be able to pepper every street with billboards. You can also go down Tufton Street, find yourself a little friendly lobby group who don't have to disclose who pays them, and lo and behold, in tomorrow's newspapers, there'll be an article about why a tax on fizzy drinks or a sugar tax is a really bad idea. I'm from the Institute of Wizard Wheezes, and I'm here to tell you, without disclosing who pays my wages, that this thing designed to help your children live longer, happier, healthier lives is absolutely awful. Something, nanny state, something. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Matters in the White House and indeed in the Kremlin, distracting us somewhat from, of course, that other war zone in the world, which many people fear may be returning to violence sooner rather than later. The Telegraph reports today that Israel has a, quote, hell plan, end quotes, to force a deal on ceasefire extension. Hamas want to proceed to the second phase of the ceasefire. Israel want to extend the 42-day first phase of the hostage ceasefire deal, which came to an end last weekend. There wasn't an agreement on chronology or on what would happen next, but the original second phase would involve the return of all living and dead Israeli hostages and further releases of Palestinian prisoners, but it's the complete withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza and serious discussions about the enclave's political future that have perhaps been thrown into disarray by Donald Trump announcing a plan to remove the entire population of the enclave and turn it into a resort. That's a genuine proposal. The AI film might be a curious combination of hideous and ridiculous, but the plan was genuinely and authentic, or at least apparently sincerely articulated. But I want to hop over to the West Bank, actually, because if and when peace is ever achieved in Gaza and indeed the West Bank, it is going to have to involve the kind of project that the Israeli journalist Yuval Abraham and the Palestinian journalist Bassel Adra represent. And on Sunday night, they won the best documentary film at the Oscars because, as you can probably gather from the fact that one of them is Israeli and one of them is Palestinian, they recognise that there can never be peace, or there can never really be a solution until the two sides actually meet. And that's why I found Israeli journalist Yuval Abraham's speech, acceptance speech, so powerful.
We made this film, Palestinians and Israelis, because together our voices are stronger. We see each other. The atrocious destruction of Gaza and its people, which must end. The Israeli hostages brutally taken in the crime of October 7th, which must be freed. When I look at Bassel, I see my brother, but we are unequal. We live in a regime where I am free under civilian law, and Bassel is under military laws that destroy his life and he cannot control. There is a different path, a political solution without ethnic supremacy, with national rights for both of our people. And I have to say, as I am here, the foreign policy in this country is helping to block this path. And, why? Can't you see that we are intertwined? That my people can be truly safe if Bassel's people are truly free and safe? There is another way. It's not too late for life, for the living. There is no other way. Thank you.
The journalist Yuval Abraham, himself Israeli, and referring frequently to his colleague Bassel Adra, himself a Palestinian there, just reminding us of why, throughout this horrible period of Middle Eastern history, the importance of recognizing that you can't make any helpful contribution to the conversation if you feel more pain and more sorrow about the death of an Israeli child than you do about a Palestinian child, or the death of a Palestinian child than you do about an Israeli child. And I'm not on Twitter anymore, so I don't really see it, but I still find it hard to believe that can upset anyone. Don't you? You hear them describing there, I look at Basil and I see my brother. How can it upset anyone to say, unless you are an ethnic supremacist, as Yuval Abraham just referred to? How dare you feel sorry in equal amounts for two human beings, unless you think they are worth different amounts, in which case you are almost certainly part of the problem and not part of the solution. It is a rather less large problem that we turn our attention to next, for want of a different word, but it is at least as intractable. Why, after decades of educational programs, of decades of promotion, do so many children still suffer from obesity? And why on earth is the problem growing rather than shrinking? Dan's in Crawley. Dan, what would you like to say?
James, thanks for having me on. How you doing?
Very welcome.
Brilliant show as always. And James, will say this isn't a vital topic just because you've got the problem now. The children who are currently overweight and will become obese and will prompt the diabetic dilemma that you're going to have in the future will also then parent children who are, factually far more likely to be like this as well. So this is a problem for future generations as well as this one. It was your second question, why are my children not obese? The answer to that is obviously really simple. They eat well and exercise. And my gripe here is with the parents, and I'm absolutely aware there'll be a tirade of abuse coming over the next hour when people ring in and say, what does he know? It's not me. It's not my fault.
Well, I'm only here for 20 more minutes, so I think you're safe on that front.
Well, we'll bring it on because, I've been talking to people about this for 20 years in health and fitness and wellbeing environments, and I put almost all of the blame at the door of parents.
Why do you think advertising exists?
Why do I think it exists?
Yeah.
Well, we know it's there to influence our decisions around what we buy and what we spend money on. I think it does work, but I will say, James,
you can't put all the blame at the feet of the parents.
Well, that's why I say almost, because we're all influenced and influenceable. You're right, but that's why I say almost.
What about education? Do you think education works?
I do, but
right. So you can't put all the blame at the feet of the parents, then, can you?
But I am saying almost. And that's really, really important, because until children are how old? 15, 16, we are the decision makers for our children in everything they do, in how they behave, and by a huge part to what they consume. Whether that's what they eat and drink at home, whether that's what
only if they leave the house with no money every day.
Well, yeah, and that's a fair point to make as well, because we know that obesity there's a huge disparity, between populations that have got money and haven't. They are far more likely.
But they can't be, because it's all the parents' fault.
Well, no, it's almost the parents'
So inequality is there as well. So we've got education, we've got advertising, we've got inequality, but it's almost all the parents' fault.
Yeah, but you're kind of making excuses in the same way that parents will make excuses, and I don't think
I'm not making excuses. I'm just counting. I'm just counting all the other things that fit into the not the parents' fault. And we've got education, we've got inequality, we've got advertising. We've probably got some other things. These aren't excuses, are they? Because you said yourself they're relevant, therefore they're explanations, not excuses.
They're relevant. You're right, they're relevant, they're contributors, contributors. But I think that we're veering into the dangerous territory of making excuses.
It doesn't feel dangerous to me, because we've established that they're explanations. So if you've got someone who is a victim of inequality, not very well educated, and highly susceptible to advertising, how can it be their fault that they're making the wrong choices?
The answer to the question is it is their fault, because all the information they need to know is easily accessible.
But that's ignoring what education means. So the information hasn't reached them. So if someone is poorly educated, susceptible to the incredible amounts of money that are spent on advertising, and a victim of inequality, how can it be their fault that they're making the wrong choices? If someone's spending billions of pounds to encourage them to make the wrong choices, how can it be their fault?
The answer to your question is, number one, do they recognise that their child is overweight? I would argue
that's not an answer to my question. That's a complete non sequitur.
But I'm coming on to it. Yeah, but I'm coming on to it, James. Okay. The answer to your question, number one, does that parent understand?
My question was, how can it be their fault if they don't understand and recognise the things you're describing?
It is their fault because their excuses don't stack up.
But they're not giving me excuses. We've established that inequality exists. We've established that advertising is incredibly powerful, and we've established that education is very, very important. So you benefit from all of those things. You're on the right side of inequality. You're on the right side of education, and you have the critical thinking skills that allow you to see through the seductive nature of advertising. So it's nothing to do with being a parent's fault. It's to do with how educated you are, how lucky you are, how wealthy you are, and how capable you are of resisting the siren lure of advertising.
I understand your logic, but I respectfully disagree, James. I think, number one, does the parent who is susceptible to all those things that you've listed, and you're absolutely right,
I know.
all of the things you've suggested are absolutely right, but does that parent recognise that their child is overweight or obese? And I would argue, yes, they do. That's a common sense position. They must do.
It's not an argument.
But the second part, which you're more keen to get to, is how do they solve that? And I would argue that all the information they need is so easily accessible. It is not expensive to eat well. It is not difficult to know how to eat well. All the information that we've ever wanted is there. And I think
you're ignoring the meaning of the word education. It's a bit like saying, why don't you speak Latin? All the information necessary is easily available. Why can't you do calculus, Dan? All the information that you need is easily available. Why can't you quote Cicero to me at great length? Because all the information you need is easily available. Why can't you design a rocket ship? All the information you need is easily available. Why don't you know the full works of Shakespeare? All the information you need is easily available. Yeah. Education is about whether or not you have access to the information you need and whether or not you have actually successfully accessed it. So we're talking about adults who haven't managed to successfully access it. So the response by saying all the information is easily available is absurd. I mean, genuinely absurd. It's a little bit like saying I'm perfectly capable of doing all of these things because the internet exists. It just hasn't got to them. An answer to the question of why somebody hasn't achieved something can't be, well, they could have done.
No, I think it is.
Okay, I know you do, but that's why I'm wasting my time. Mind how you go. John's in Bloxwich. John, what would you like to say?
How you doing, James?
I'm all right, mates.
Good stuff.
How many numbers can you do pi to?
Oh, I haven't got an excuse, but the information is easily available.
Well played. Carry on.
Yeah, I don't know where to start, so I'll try and be brief, but I used to be an obese kid myself, so I understand how easy it is to get there and how easy it is to slip into that as a child. I mean, I've got 3 young kids at the moment, and I think you're right in terms of it is all about education. But like you say, if you don't know what you don't know, how do you know what to look for? I remember when I started training, I used to think if I drink a protein shake, I'm suddenly going to be in amazing shape. I mean, that was my level of
psychology. That's psychology,
That's right.
and also the adverts. The advert of the person for the protein shake has got a body like I don't know who are someone very
right.
bodyish.
No, you're absolutely right.
Chris Pratt.
Like Hercules, and I thought if I drink this shake, go to the gym, pump a little bit of iron, that is exactly how I'm going to look. But years later, the information is there, but it's took a lot of time for me to kind of dig out and see what works and get to where I am. But anyway, to spare my children the same sort of fate, it's just a case of me passing on that knowledge to them and reinforcing it. So something that we do, and not to digress, but we used to have a star chart for them to earn their money. So if they did certain tasks throughout the week, they'd get a few quid at the end. So now we've upgraded that a little bit. I've designed my own with specific tasks on there, and each task is worth 12p. So some of those tasks might be get up, get ready for school yourself, do your teeth, put your towel away after your shower, etc., etc. But a couple of those things are, you get up in the morning, you have a glass of water, you do 5 minutes exercise 3 times a week. This is for the 5 and the 7-year-old.
I quite like this. What's the most either of them have made in a day?
So the most you can do in a month, because they get paid when I get paid, and a third of that goes for they can buy what they want, and 2/3 goes away for long-term savings. So that teaches them good kind of savings and money habits.
You need a Channel 4 documentary, mate. You're super dad.
It works quite well. So
what's the most they make in a month?
£20 note.
Oh, there's a limit on it, is there?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Because I was thinking, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I really want a PlayStation. I'm going to drink 400 glasses of water every morning.
Well, you know what? If you want extras, you put caveats in there. Okay, well, you want to get a bonus, you can put 3 extras on there each month that you want specifically. If you can do those tasks, they're a little bit more onerous than put your towel away.
This is amazing.
So we can get there.
And is it on a spreadsheet or is it on the fridge?
It's on an Excel.
Yeah, I knew it. That's you've lost me now. You might as well be speaking Mandarin. And I know I'm perfectly capable of speaking Mandarin. All the information is out there, and I've got no excuse for not being able to do it. I blame my parents. And do you worry, John, that when they get... I mean, I wonder how many people listening who've got older parents are thinking to themselves, yeah, that's going to be great until they are 12 or until they are 13.
Well, you know what? This is the thing. It's I try and second guess what they're going to come across. So when it comes to food and things, I'll say, well, look, when you go to school and you see your friends, you are going to have friends that have this. They do eat this. They encourage you to do that. Yeah. The reason they do that is for X, Y, Z. So when they come across it, something goes off in their brain. Hang on, my dad said this would happen. It's happening exactly how he said it would happen.
Okay, so this is series 2. This is series 2 of Super Dad. It gets psychological. This is fantastic.
But ultimately, mate, when they're of age, it's down to them. You can only do enough preparation.
Got to equip them.
Tell
me about it.
When they're older.
Send them out into the world.
That's all they're doing now. Yeah.
And you think a lot of this is driven by the fact that you were overweight yourself?
I think so, because I've messed up a lot in my life, and I'm getting. Well, I've just made silly mistakes across. When I was younger, and I'm trying to kind of learn from all those, and they're a blessing in a way. So our kids don't have to make the same mistakes that I did.
They learn from our mistakes in a way. I hope that.
Yeah.
I mean, don't beat yourself up too much, will you? And don't forget that you can't make their decisions for them as they get older.
No.
But you're just going to give them the best possible chance of not falling into some of the potholes that you fell into.
That's all it is. Just prepare them well enough so they can handle life themselves. That's it.
Oh, that's beautiful. Actually, seriously, I don't want you to think I'm being glib. That's beautifully put. It sounds like you're really knocking it out of the park. Well done, mate. Thank you, John.
Well, thanks, mate. Means a lot. Cheers.
You take care. Where did that come from? That sort of little outbreak of dewy-eyed admiration. 12:49 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:52. I get a lot of messages when we're discussing obesity about some of the adverts that are running on the station, on the programme while we are discussing obesity. But that proves my point. Advertising is an incredibly powerful force. Pays my mortgage. That's how powerful it is. But it doesn't answer the question, does it? It doesn't answer the question of why some people are exposed to the same influences and react differently. Why some people who eat the same food react differently. And speaking of food, I'll give you some good news, finally, after this diet of White House-inspired bad news. I know that spring is on the way. Do you know how I know that spring is on the way? Because my mate Enzo the ice cream is back on his pitch outside the garden centre in Syon Park. I saw him on Sunday. He's back. It's like the first cuckoo of spring when Enzo appears. Comes back from his travels in his ice cream van and parks up outside the garden centre. I know what you're thinking. And the answer is I bought a new rake, actually. That's how exciting my life is these days. There were times at lunchtime on Sunday when you could have found me with my shirt off in Turnmills. But these days, I'm more likely to be found in a garden centre buying a new rake and also stopping for a delicious lime and mint soda, a sort of alcohol-free mojito, which is one of the many little extras that you can purchase if you're lucky enough to come across Enzo on your travels in West London. 12:53 is the time. Back to the question of obesity and why the societal efforts, the huge societal efforts put into persuading us to prevent our children from becoming obese have failed on such a monumental scale. Matthew's in Basildon. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James.
Hello, mate.
How you doing? First-time listener, first-time caller, so go easy on me.
First-time listener, first-time caller?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, this will be good.
Yeah, so basically I was a very obese child, a very obese adult, in fact. I was 27.5 stone up to 5 years ago.
Blimey.
Got 2 kids. I lost 14 stone naturally. After my son actually inspired me to lose the weight.
What happened? What was the pivot?
He came home from school, learning the body, and said, "Dad, you're going to die. You're going to have a heart attack." He was 7, and I literally broke down.
I bet you did. That's a moment, mate. I'll tell you what. First time listener, first time caller. You've just hit the. If this was a fairground and you'd swung the mallet, it would have just rung the bell at the top. But that's absolutely incredible. Your boy says that. God.
Yeah, so it was one of their moments, and then I decided to get in the gym, change my food and everything else, which obviously the kids started to see the positive side of it, because before that, advertising, as you were just talking about, is massive because obviously YouTube, between every video you get a fast food ad, or you get like a chocolate or something which they want or they need. But like I say, my son was my motivation, and now basically I ended up spinning it around where he sees me to the gym eating the right foods. He wants to follow me, and I actually take my son, because as most kids at that age, he's 12 at the moment. He loves playing on the PlayStation and whatnot. So I'll get him off the computer. He does play football, but also I get him in the gym with me, doing some walking or on the treadmill, that sort of stuff. And I actually document it all on like Instagram and stuff for us to keep it exciting, so he can just sort of keep a track of where we're going. Because that's what I did with my whole journey. So, yeah, I think that, like you were saying, that the advertising is key.
I love that, and found a way through it. But of course, what you also did is remind us that your boy was being taught this at school in a way that made him think about you, but didn't, if I've understood you correctly, didn't necessarily make him think about him.
No. Didn't think of himself. He just come up to me and said, Dad, I need to ask you something, or tell you something. He said, you're going to have a heart attack. We're learning about the body. So he was only 7 at the time, and that was it. It was literally a heartbreaking moment for me. I remember, because I lost my own dad at 11, and that was my spiral for eating. It was a comfort thing. I used to eat when I was happy. When I was sad, I would eat for the sake of it. And it just got out of control. I was 27.5 stone. And then him coming up to me, my own son, saying to me, Dad, you're going to die. It was a real heartbreaking moment for me, which turned my whole life around. I say, I've been on stage now, done body transformation, everything. I started documenting with my son to the gym and everything.
I hear you. What's your Insta if people want to have a look?
It's at Mr. Riggs1.
There you go.
I tell you what, it's been a life changer for me. But I'm just going to say that I don't think you can blame the parents. To be honest with you, I think when I was a kid, I used to go to school. My mum would give me the right foods. I'd go to school. I wouldn't even eat that food. I'd end up going into the shop, chocolates, crisps, whatever. I come home, chuck my lunch in the bin. My mum would be like, you've eaten your lunch. Next day, do me another packed lunch. I mean, same again. She'd give me a couple of quid.
It's an unhealthy relationship with food, and if you had an unhealthy relationship with another human being, or you had an unhealthy relationship with something else that is addictive, or an unhealthy relationship with a fixed odds betting terminal or a bookies or whatever it might be, then nobody would really try to blame it on your parents. But it's tempting. Simple solutions to complicated questions are incredibly attractive, as the political landscape is telling us all the time. Matthew, thank you, mate. That was incredible. That'll really stay with me, that moment. That little 7-year-old sitting at school watching I was going to say blackboard, I'm showing my age, watching the interactive multi-facet screen thing, and just thinking, hang on, that's my dad. My dad's got that. Gosh. Thank you. It's coming up to 12:58. I've got about 48 seconds, Jimmy, so make it count.
Yeah. Hey, James. First time call, long time listener.
Welcome.
Yeah. I think a lot of points you've come out with are really, really good, but I think over the last 30 years, one of the main things that's changed is the environment, what's inside the house now to keep children in, and the fact that a lot of parents don't like the kids going out.
Yeah.
So you've got PlayStations, you've got entertainment, you've got all this kind of stuff inside. Televisions with multiple amounts of channels.
It's got to be a factor.
Yeah, and it's go to the cupboard, pick up biscuits, pick up this. But the main thing is I see so many parents not letting their kids out. They're too scared to let their kids out.
That's very true.
There's no parks as much as there was anymore. You're not allowed on the fields as much as when I was a kid. The youth clubs are not there anymore. There's so much not there that there was 20 years ago, apart from all the advertising for the foods and everything.
It doesn't matter how alluring the technology is, because you would still be able to do the other thing as well. It's not either or, but of course the more, I don't want to say paranoid, the more worried a parent is about the outside world, about threats, about dangers, and part of that is 24-hour news, of course, which is also a technological development that we didn't grow up with, then the more likely they are, even subconsciously, just to think that, well, I don't mind that they're on screens all the time, because at least they're not out running the risk of getting into trouble or getting hurt. Jimmy, I warned you I didn't have much time, but you did a cracking job. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including the James O'Brien Daily. Best bits of my show, 60 minutes long, every single day. Download it now for free from your App Store. Oh, and while I'm here, if you need a laugh, download Full Disclosure with Matt Ford. If you can listen to that and not laugh out loud, there's a very real chance that you're made of margarine. So get that from your App Store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.